Hotel. I'm going to be speaking upon a subject called Before You Had a Face, and I'm going to speak on astrology. In this life that we live in, we have to be able to look at ourselves from a wide perspective. Often you heard me say that we look at life in what we call reality through a keyhole. That keyhole is limited, and what we call reality is based upon what we call the five senses. And in the videos, when I speak to you, I'm going to gradually introduce different metaphors and different means of thinking about particular subjects, present a different language to you. So the term before you had a face, what it actually means is that when we are first born, there's layers that are put upon us. We find out that we're male, that's a layer. We found out that we're female, that's a layer. We found out and we find out what race we are. We think about all these things and they become different layers, and it blocks a certain part of ourselves because we become identifying with these different layers. So going back before you had a face means that when you're growing in the womb of your mother, you're in this water and you're floating, and you have a specific type of peace, all-knowing. You have something within you that is satisfied, that is comfort, that is at ease, that is with peace. Now, the powerful aspects of this and the powerful experience of this, and what makes the woman, the female, so powerful in civilization, is that whatever the mother is going through when she's carrying us, if she's angry a lot, or if she's spiritual, if she's happy, or if she's sad, if she's reading particular type of literature, if she's listening to a certain type of music, if she's going through any type of trials and tribulations, of course, life will present certain things to her, but how she maintains herself, how she maintains her consciousness while she's carrying us, we will become a living personification of whatever she has went through. And so basically, we will have peace, but periodically, because of what we experience with our mother, and I'm not putting a heavy burden on the woman and the female, but I just want you to know how important you are, why you should be treated as a queen, why you should act like a queen, why you should dress like a queen, why you should think like a queen. It's very important because energy is vibration. What is vibration? Vibrations are messages that are given to us. And through those messages, the dialogue of what the mother is carrying on with her head, the child feels that. The emotions, the child feels that. So much so that from an astrological standpoint, there are different symbols that correlate and correspond to this time when the child is growing in the womb and when the child comes out of the womb. When the child first comes out of the womb, they have no sense of self. You can put a mirror in front of our faces when we are 4 and 5 and 6 months old, and we'll just look at it like, what is that? We don't identify with that as who we are because we don't have a sense of self at that point. And then that's why when you see a child, they're looking at their hands and they're looking at their feet, and everything is happening. They pass gas and they defecate on themselves, they urinate on themselves. They don't have no sense of self. They're just all free human beings. They're free, open. And so when the human being and the child begins to crawl and walk, and whatever your name may be, if it's Mary or Pamela, and you say, Pamela, and you turn around and respond to that. Now, she's been calling you A whole lot of times. Pamela, Mary, Bobby, Jimmy, been calling you all these different times, but you never responded. The moment that you respond to that name that has been given to you and you look, that's when you get a face. It's a layer. And then as time goes on, there's another layer that comes upon you. As I said before, you find out that you're a male or you're a female. And then after that, you find out other things, and all these become layers. The house that you live in, the neighborhood that you live in, the school that you go to. All of these are layers. Now, the layers are important on the physical plane, but what happens is that we lose who we were before we gain all these faces. We forget that part of our beginnings and our origins where there was a certain type of peace, a certain type of connection, a certain type of awareness that we possessed that connected us to the universe, that connected us to spirit. That part that we experienced before we had a face is the key to freedom, the key to overcoming trials and tribulations, the key to gain attention and know who you really are. That you're not these layers. These layers are just names that are put upon you, faces that are put upon you, so you can function on the physical plane. You need these labels. You need to know that you are a male. You need to know that you're female. You need to know all these different things in order to function, because these labels is what the surface mind uses so that we're able to go about our business and be able to identify, to be able to make a distinction between this person and that person, male, female. Those things happen. We need distinctions. But from a spiritual standpoint, the distinction sometimes can get in the way because the shock of being birthed and being born is very powerful. And what happens is that that shock makes us forget that time and place before we had a face. And so my whole point is that in order for us to know who we are and to know thyself, we have to know the mechanisms by which we perceive, the mechanisms by which we use and misuse, and we get into depressions or we get into misunderstandings because we identify with these faces as who we are. And these faces are not who we are. They are extensions and layers that we need to function on the physical plane. And so when we meditate and when we pray, we have to go back to the time within our minds before we had a face. That space is what we need. That room is what we need. That awareness is what we need, because that is what lives on when the physical body goes. Because we're not our physical bodies. And to be aware of the differentiation that our emotions are not who we are, our body is not who we are, our minds is not who we are, they're just instruments for us to function again on the physical plane. Now, I said that I was going to talk about astrology in relation to before you had a face. There are 10 planets, and those planets, well, let me step back and say this. We are a microcosm. This is based off a principle called the principle of correspondence. We are a microcosm, and the universe is a macrocosm. What does that mean? That means that we are related and connected to the universe, to the stars, to the planets. As we evolved millions of years ago as light forms and light beings, when we first came to this planet, we're not from Earth, we're from other planets and other parts of the galaxy in the universe. Of course, these things are not taught to you. They're not in your elementary school or junior high school curriculum or high school curriculum or even college curriculum, because it's what you call esoteric knowledge. Knowledge that's not taught. The knowledge of you having an understanding of this will make you free. And the powers that be and a lot of authorities do not want you to understand who you are, where you come from, and that you have a power to overcome anything that comes to your directions if you get to that spot before you had a face. Because then you can get rid of all the illusions, because what we call reality to some degree is illusion. What do you mean? It's always changing. It's always changing. So how we're able to connect to reality is by going within before we had a face. Now, Suten Aten, how is this going to help me in my everyday life? How this helps you in your everyday life from a practical standpoint? You're able to know and connect to that real part of you and know that everything else that's outside of you, you have no control over. The only thing you have control is the time before you had a face, and connect with that. Then you become more aware and you become more understanding of who you are as a human being. And you begin to know the importance of particular basic aspects of your life that have changed your ability to make money, that have changed your ability to function in your relationships, to change your ability to learn, change your ability on all different levels. So on a practical standpoint, you'll know what to do, how to decide, what direction to take when you have a trial or you have a crisis in your life. You'll be able to connect with that part, that space, before you had a face. And you get to that through walking through the woods, through meditation. You want to peel all the things that is not the real self, because what happens is the shock of being born makes us think that our physical body is who we are, and our physical body is not who we are. And that right there, if you just contemplate on that, then you'll be able to make that differentiation of not making a mistake and thinking that your body is you. And when the body leaves, or when you, what they call, die, your spirit and soul leaves the body. That's what death is. And to a certain degree, another aspect of before you had a face is that you realize that from an external sense and from the outside, that you always are going through changing. Nothing stays the same. And it's important that you realize and understand through the concept of what we call life and death. Again, this is a practical. It's very practical when you use your everyday life, that you are always going through a process of dying. You're always going through a process of being reborn. So from the ages of 1 to 7, there is a birth, and then there's a death. Because when you are 7 years old, you shouldn't be acting like you're 4 and 3. And then there's another span of growth between 7 and 14. When you're 14 years old, you have to die. You have to die. You have to die and not act like you're 7. When you, from 14 to 21, when you turn 21, there's a part of you that have to die, because in being 21, you shouldn't act like you are 14. And this is what happens to most of us, because the environment, when we're growing, the environment and the people, things happen to us that arrest our development. So some of us, and most of us, have to work through what I call arrested development. We wasn't able to develop like we should because of possibly mental abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, or just the environment that we were in stunted our development. But all those things, from an esoteric and spiritual standpoint, are necessary for your growth also. So it's not all the time what happens to you, it's how you respond to it. And that's the spiritual aspect of it, and that's the practical aspect of it. And from an astrological standpoint, you are able to see what periods of your life that you will have arrested development. What periods in your life that you will have to really, really hone yourself and consistently go to that time before you had a phase. Now, when I was saying the microcosm and the macrocosm, the principal correspondence and astrology and how practical it is, astrology gives you a platform. It's not the platform, but it's a platform. Some people use religion. Some people use the Bible. Some people use the Quran. Some people use the Bhagavad Gita. These are all ancient sources that you can use in order for you to gain some type of idea of spirituality. But because you read the Bible doesn't mean you're spiritual. Just because you study astrology doesn't make you spiritual. Just because you study the Quran doesn't make you spiritual. You have to be able to take whatever you're reading and what you're learning and be able to implement that in your everyday life. If you can't implement it in your everyday life, then something is missing. And so with astrology, which I've been using as a spiritual platform, what it does and what a chart is, it's a graphic representation of your journey. The African term is called Hapetsaba, the journey of the soul. And you have 10 planets, actually 8 planets. The sun and the moon are stars. Well, the sun is a star, and the moon is a satellite, reflects the energy of the sun. And so when we talk about the sun, for instance, the sun sign, which is a misnomer, when they say sun sign, they're actually saying the earth in relation to the sun is at particular angles when it's going around the sun. And so when the earth in relation to the sun is here, it's called Aries, which is the beginning of spring, the vernal equinox. And then when we go to the other side, that's the beginning of summer, which is Cancer. And then we go on this other side, it's beginning of autumn, which is Libra. And then we go here, it's the beginning of winter, which we call Capricorn. And of course, in between Aries, there's Taurus, Gemini, and all of those are angles. So the so-called sun signs are angles in relation to the earth and the sun. During those times, those different angles, souls are incarnated into the physical plane. And each angle represents a vibration. It represents an energy. And that vibration, that energy, because we are part of the macrocosm, the universe, we are affected when we take our first breath. Oh yeah, we cry, take that first breath. That's when the soul begins to operate on the physical plane. And that time, that day, that year, and that place will reflect upon that soul. And we call that a natal chart. And the sun represents, when we talk about the sun, we have a sun in the macrocosm, we have a sun in the microcosm. So the sun in the microcosm represents the spirit, your spirit. So whatever your sun sign is, it tells you about your spirit and why you came here, what your purpose is. So if it's in Aries, it means that spirit represents the vitality. Spirit represents the light. Spirit represents the purpose. Spirit represents the cause. So if you're born during the time of Aries, this means that your purpose and cause is to be a pioneer, to be a leader, to seek, and to go beyond boundaries without fear and be courageous in whatever you do. And so in terms of vitality, when you participate in this particular activity and you're Aries, then you gain this great sense of awareness, this great sense of vitality. And if it's Taurus, then we're talking about comfort, we're talking about productivity, we're talking about beauty. A lot of Taurus with the sun there means that music and song in the throat. Aries deals with the head. Aries deals with the throat. So you have many great musicians and artists born under the sun sign of Taurus. Stevie Wonder, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington. All these musicians, Taurus represents to a very large degree art and beauty, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every Taurus, of course, is able to sing or have a beautiful voice, but it's guaranteed that they love substance. It's what you call an earth sign. Aries is a fire sign, which deals with enthusiasm, vision, activity. Metabolism is very high. Taurus is earth, so it represents being stable. It represents productivity. It represents silence. It represents solidity. So all the signs and sun signs are a portion, an angle of the earth. And so we, through millions of years, became entrained. What do you mean when you say entrained? From a mental standpoint and from a physical standpoint, when the rhythms of the planets and the rhythm of the sun, all these different rhythms, we became connected to it. And we became a part of the rhythm. And we began to observe what we call day. And we observe what we call night. And our brains and our bodies begin to synchronize with that. So much so that anything that happens in the universe, we are affected by it. And so we have the 10 planets, and I'm going to go over 10 planets quickly. We have the sun, which represents the spirit, the cause. We have the moon, which represents the unconscious, the subconscious part of ourselves. And it also represents our needs, the first 7 years of our lives, how we relate to other human beings, our emotional self. So we have the sun, we have the moon. And then we have Mercury. Mercury represents how we process information, our perceptions, the 5 physical senses, how we are able to bring things together called cognition, bring things together and reach a conclusion. Let's go real fast. And the next one is Venus. Venus represents our ability to understand reciprocity in relationships, to relate with a person, to relate to our jobs, to relate to our loved ones, to relate to our children. The principle of relating and having balance. Venus. Now we all have these different principles within us. And then you have Mars. Mars represents your ability to overcome, to be combative and be strong. We all need to be spiritual warriors. So Mars gives us that intestinal fortitude to go beyond ourselves. And if we have to struggle, then we deal with the struggle. If we have to fight, we deal with the fight and we overcome whatever trials and tribulations we have. Mars is very important. All of the voices are important because the 10 planets or the 8 planets represents voices within us. When I say voices, I don't necessarily mean verbal. I mean they are impulses, the instincts that we have, the inclinations that we have, are the voices that the planets represent. So we have these different voices and we need to know and understand that, and it'll give us a better understanding from a wider perspective of why we think the way we think, why we behave the way we behave. So we have Mars, now we have Jupiter. Jupiter is our ability to expand and go beyond ourselves in terms of intellect. It represents philosophy. The tenets of philosophy is ethics, ontology, and epistemology. Epistemology deals with how do you know that you know. philosophy, Jupiter, and we travel. We travel and go to different states. We travel and we go to different parts of the world. So Jupiter represents expansion and learning on a one-on-one experience, a direct experience of learning, but also studying and learning. Jupiter represents meaning. Fast forward. And so the next voice or principle is called Saturn. Saturn represents how you're able to construct structurally your everyday life, how you're able to plan, how you're able to sit down and have discipline and sacrifice, how you learn through your trials and tribulations. That's what Saturn represents, a very, very important voice, a very, very important principle. Some people call Saturn and that voice within you the governor. It enables you to have boundaries, because without boundaries, then it's impossible for you to accomplish. You have to have some type of shape, some type of form, some type of plan in order for you to complete and to participate in whatever endeavors that you have. So we have, after Saturn, we have Uranus. Uranus represents the part of you that when you go through different things in life and you're learning different things in life, you gain what you call revelation. And Uranus represents the aha in life, the epiphanies, the things that come to you outside of books, outside of institutions, outside of any type of knowledge, outside of the inner. The inner you is important. Uranus represents freedom, but that's where Saturn and Uranus have a connection, because a Uranus that's not stable in a chart, or Uranus that have what we call difficult aspects, will seek freedom at any cost. And freedom without some type of boundaries is destruction. So freedom without restrictions is destruction. Uranus. So now we got Neptune. I'm almost finished. We have Neptune. What does Neptune represent? Neptune represents the part of ourselves that we're able to connect with all other life forms. It takes us outside of our central self, our core self, and we're able to relate with other life forms. And we don't have a philosophy. When we're in tune to Neptune, we don't have a philosophy and belief system that says an I and an it. In other words, when I look at a life form, when I look at an animal, when I look at the birds, and I look at the bees, and I look at a dog or a cat, other life forms that the Creator has created, I don't look at it from a separate sense that I'm observing it. I'm the observer and I'm observing a object. That's an I and an it. What Neptune enables us to do, that is to have a I and a thou, meaning that we're able to connect with other beings, other life forms in nature, and we say it's an I and a thou. When something happens to that tree, then I feel that something happens to me. I'm connected to it. If something happens to the ocean, it happens to me. If something happens to our environment, it happens to me. So Neptune enables us to have an I and a thou, as opposed to an I and an it. The last planet or the last principle or the last voice is Pluto. Pluto represents a part of our lives that enable us to die. We have to die every day. In order for us to grow, we have to die. In order for us to embrace life, we have to embrace death. Because if we don't embrace death, then we're not able really to live a quality of life. If you take for granted, for instance, that your mother is living, or your father is living, or your spouse is living, and you don't realize that they could die at any time, then your behavior toward them can be at times very aloof or hum. But if you really understand that at any minute they could die, or any minute you could die, from the physical, because our soul and spirit lives on, then you're able to look at your mother with love, look at your father with love, look at your children with love, and understand that our time here on this planet is limited. So Pluto gives you an intense awareness to take in life seriously and to be able to die every day and be reborn. It is very, very powerful and important. So I talked about before you had a face, and we spoke on astrology. I hope you enjoyed it, and my Facebook followers and friends and families and the ones who subscribe to my channel, I love you and I thank you so much. I would like for you to like it if you like it, make comments if you will, give me something that I can feedback on, so I know what you may need, and I may be missing something. I'll be more aware of what you may want to hear. Please, please like it and share this information if it has given you any type of solace and understanding. God bless you. Hotel.